Good morning. Today on Spotlight, the road to the U.S. Senate. Who will represent Michigan for the next 6 years? Incumbent Gary Peters or his challenger, businessman John James, who we interviewed on this program a couple of weeks ago. This morning, we'll check in with the hard-charging Democrat who rides a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and describes himself as fighting for Michigan. And later on our Sunday morning program, we'll get some important updates from Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. It's Sunday, October the 18th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Senator, oftentimes when people get ready to vote, you may see them walking into the polls, and they're going to give you about 10 seconds to say, why should I send you back to Washington? Give me just one reason. And what would that one reason be to convince that person?
Well, I think a great reason is that I've been ranked one of the most effective U.S. senators in getting things done. In fact, I have passed and written and passed more bills through the United States Senate than any other United States senator the last 2 years, either Democratic or Republican. And that's it just in my first term. You can imagine what I can do with 6 more years. And
if they gave you 6 more years, what would be the number one thing that you would want to accomplish that you weren't able to get done in your first 6 years?
Well, I think there's no question. The number one thing that we must do is get through this COVID crisis. No question about it. This has taken, it's lasted a whole lot longer than any of us would like. We have seen major missteps by the Trump administration, is why we're paying the price right now and continue to be in this. We've got to be focused on making sure that we deal with the public health crisis. We've got to make sure the economic crisis. And I'm particularly focused on making sure families can keep food on the table, a roof over their head, folks who have been unemployed as a result of no fault of their own, and to make sure our small businesses have the resources to survive. There's no way we get this economy back up and running as quickly as any of us would like if our small businesses don't succeed, which is why I worked aggressively for a paycheck protection program to help those small businesses. And in terms of families, it's why the Pandemic Assistance Act is a bill that I wrote, but the Republicans in the Senate, and they're all lockstep, Republican senators all vote lockstep, they're all focused on the Supreme Court nominee, not dealing with the issues that are impacting folks here in Michigan.
Your Republican opponent told me that you have been fibbing about his position on health care and pre-existing conditions. Have you?
It's pretty clear where he is. In fact, I've seen the video. I think most viewers have seen the video of him actually screaming into the camera on how he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act is what makes sure that people have protections for pre-existing conditions. We have to keep that act in place. He has no plan whatsoever. If you ask him what is the plan if the Affordable Care Act is overturned, and we have a Supreme Court justice who says that she will likely do that based on the writings that she's had in the past, what are you going to do? My opponent is really good at memorizing short, hollow talking points, not so good when it comes to actually concrete plans. And these are serious times that we're facing here in the country. We need serious folks who are thinking deeply about how we solve these problems. It's what I do each and every day. That's why I pass and write more legislation than anyone else through the U.S. Senate, because we think deeply. We don't have time in this country for folks who just have memorized talking points with no concrete plans.
No legislation is perfect in regards to the Affordable Care Act. If there's one thing that you wish you could change, what would it be?
Well, it has to do a better job to help those small businesses. There were provisions in the Affordable Care Act that would help small businesses afford the coverage for their employees. There were credits, et cetera, that were put in it. It turns out they have not worked that well. They have not worked as well as I certainly would like, and certainly many small business owners would. We need to change that.
We'll hurry right back with more questions to U.S. Senator Gary Peters. Stay with us. Senator, many Republicans are very concerned that if Joe Biden gets elected and he gets control of the Senate, they already have control of the House. If they can keep all of that, that they're going to raise taxes. Are you going to raise taxes if you get that kind of clout in Washington?
Well, I think there's no question we have to deal with a significant federal deficit, and unfortunately that deficit is growing as a result of our response to this COVID crisis. So we're going to have to look at how we bring that down and how we put ourselves on sound financial footing. And as I look at dealing with the deficit, it's really a three-legged stool, and you have to deal with all three legs. So that means, first off, you got to get the economy growing.
So are you going to go after big corporations, or will the average person have to foot that bill?
Well, yeah, if I may finish here, Chuck, I mean, this deserves a really serious answer, is that you have to, first off, make sure that we're growing the economy and making sure that we recovered from the COVID. We also have to cut spending as well in order to deal with the deficit, and I've worked to do that. In fact, one piece of legislation that I wrote and passed has already saved over $400 million of taxpayer money to work to make sure we put on sound fiscal setting. But then we got to deal with revenue. And certainly when the Republicans push through a huge tax cut for the wealthiest folks in this country, the top percentage of the top 1% and large companies, that blew a $1.5 to $2 trillion hole in our economy. So certainly we need to make sure that the tax breaks go to middle-class families, folks who are struggling right now, not the absolute richest in our society, as the Republicans have voted for. My opponent supports that cut to the wealthiest people in the country and to large corporations who basically just paid it off in stock dividends and large bonuses to their CEOs, and middle-class families were hurt. We need to make sure there's fairness in American society, and that means middle-class families and those who aspire to be in the middle class are the ones that need help.
You just recently revealed a very personal story that deals with your first wife and abortion. We are in the midst of a Senate confirmation hearing. As personal as that story is, there will certainly be some skeptics and say, why are you coming out with this story now that happened so many years ago? If you weren't in a very heated Senate race, would you be revealing this story?
It has nothing to do with that. The reason this story is so important to be told, and it's a story that so many families can tell. In fact, I've just received that outpouring of folks who have had similar situations where it's a medical necessity and an abortion was needed to save the life of my first wife and certainly her health. And it was a fetus that would never possibly survive. It was a medical necessity. The physician said that very clearly. He couldn't do it because of politics. We had to seek somebody else to help. And had there been a delay, it would have serious medical ramifications. And the reason this story is so important, one, families, countless families and women deal with this issue on a regular basis. So people need to hear those stories. But the reason it's important now is because we have a Supreme Court justice, or I should say a nominee, who wants to be the Supreme Court justice, who in her writings are very clear that she would like to overturn Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court is going to change. That's why the Republicans are pushing through this nominee, because they know that she is inclined and has said in writings that she will likely overturn Roe versus Wade. This fundamental constitutional right to reproductive freedom is at risk in a way that it hasn't been for decades. People have to understand how this issue impacts everyday folks. And women face tremendous, gut-wrenching, tough decisions that they have to make. Politics shouldn't get involved in that. It should be between a woman, between her physician and family members that she wants to bring into those decisions. These are intense decisions, intensely personal. And all of that now could be changed with the Supreme Court nominee.
Do you believe that the Trump administration has moved America backwards or forwards on race relations?
Certainly, I believe it's gone backwards, and his words speak very loud when it comes to that. And I think it is unfortunate. We need to lean forward, particularly when we see the type of civil unrest we have seen. We need to take concrete action. We can't keep talking about this stuff. We can't keep studying. We need to take concrete action to deal with the issue.
Have we moved backwards or forwards on the environment?
Certainly have moved backwards on the environment. We have a Trump administration who has been unwinding protections for clean air and clean water. You know, to give you an example, I've been fighting to deal with PFAS contamination, which is very prevalent in our state. Of the 700 PFAS contaminated sites around the country, 200 of them are here in our state. We have folks who are living next to these toxic sites who are dying and who are being impacted in a significant way. We have to aggressively deal with it. I've been pushing on a number of fronts. I was successful in getting legislation through the national defense authorization to phase it out from the military so they can find alternatives to using PFAS in firefighting foams. But we have to set a standard to clean up. We have to be aggressive in that. And the Trump administration has been fighting us every step of the way in a critical issue to protect our clean water. And here as Michiganders, you know, the Great Lakes are in our DNA, and we have an obligation to protect the Great Lakes for ourselves and for future generations. It's drinking water for 40 million people. And we've seen the Trump administration not get involved in dealing with PFAS contamination, which threatens the lakes. In fact, he has tried to zero out Great Lakes restoration funding, absolutely critical funding to clean up old toxic sites, to be able to make sure our watersheds are clean, water flowing into the Great Lakes. He zeroes that out. I've successfully fought against that. I want the United States to be a leader again.
Have you been avoiding your opponent on debates on commercial television where you can reach the widest number of people? He believes you have.
Well, I agreed to debates before he did. I agreed to 2 debates back in July, I believe. I'd love to have a debate. I'd love to talk about issues with him. It would be interesting to have him actually talk about issues. So I agreed to the debate. It's basically the 2 debates that he did last time he ran. Those were the 2 debates that he did last time. And it's basically the same format of debates that have been done for Senate candidates since the 1990s. I haven't heard back from them at all. If he wants to debate, come join me. I've already agreed to 2 debates.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for joining us today on Spotlight. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Great, thank you.
Coming up, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. We'll be right back. We've got obviously a very serious situation, and the eyes of the world have been focused on Michigan with these alleged terrorist plots. First of all, as an attorney, do you believe that you have an ironclad case with the gentleman that you have charged?
Look, I mean, you know, I don't think it's ever a good idea to, you know, say we have a 100% chance of conviction on any case. But I will say this. These are very strong charges. There's substantial evidence to support the charges, and we're very confident in these cases. But that being the case, I will say this. I mean, we have a problem here in Michigan, not just in Michigan, but in numerous other states. This isn't just a Michigan problem. It's a national problem at this point. And we need to make sure that whether you're a public official or whether you are a private citizen, that we can ensure the safety of those who live in our state. It's a really troubling development for certain.
How widespread do you believe this is? And is it getting worse?
Much of it I would call white supremacism. And many of these groups subscribe to the notion of a civil war of some sort or an overthrow of the government. So that's obviously incredibly concerning. And we've only seen an exponential rise in the number of these groups and the membership of these groups because they thrive on unrest. And between COVID, between the Black Lives Matter protests, and frankly, with the encouragement of the President of the United States, these groups are thriving.
You just mentioned the president. Does the governor bear any responsibility in this with her executive orders that the Michigan Supreme Court just knocked down?
Okay, well, at the time that these orders were promulgated, they were lawful. It was only recently, obviously, that this 1945 law that has been obviously in existence since then has ever been deemed to be unconstitutional. It was not the way that she was utilizing it. It was the law in and of itself that has been utilized for many years. When the court ruled, it was a 4-3 decision. You know, this was not a case where it was obvious, or it should have been obvious to anyone, that those orders were unconstitutional. But did the president seize upon that as a way to say that the governor is somehow denying people their freedom just by virtue of asking them to wear a mask and to protect themselves? I mean, it's a troubling set of circumstances.
And when the president uses phrases like liberate Michigan, you believe that for these organizations, those are code words?
Yeah, it's a rallying cry. Liberate Michigan. Who is supposed to be liberating Michigan, and from what exactly? And I will say this, you know, Chuck, we've both been around long enough to see many, many different presidents in office, many Republican presidents in office. But all I've ever seen previously is very quick, widespread condemnation of these types of organizations from previous presidents. Not so anymore. This is a president that seems to enjoy supporting and encouraging these organizations. And if you recall, it wasn't just the Liberate Michigan tweet, it was the fact that these same individuals who had stormed the Capitol and were actually hovering over the gallery of the state Senate as the Senate was convening in session. And here our president, urged the governor to negotiate with these individuals and called them very good people. We've never seen that before in American history, not since I've been alive anyway.
On this investigation, law enforcement in Michigan, Democrats and Republicans appeared to be very united, and you stood up there as a united front that this will not be tolerated in a lawful land. Do you believe that Attorney General Barr should have by now made stronger statements himself as the chief law enforcement officer in this country in regards to this and what you've just described, the atmosphere of this?
I absolutely do. Firstly, I commend the career public servants that put their lives on the line in order to bring this case, whether it be the FBI or those at the, U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern and Western districts. But Bill Barr has been largely absent. And if you remember, of course, he testified under oath before the House Judiciary Committee in Congress that he didn't know anything about any threats against the governor. Meanwhile, his own FBI, of course, were investigating these organizations for those very threats. And then he said he hadn't even been briefed about this until just prior to these cases being brought. And I find it very unbelievable that that would be the case. He is the top law enforcement official for all of the United States, and yet he's had very little to say about a plot to, kidnap and execute a sitting governor.
Do you believe that this incident adds more pressure to be able to ban guns inside and even outside in the surrounding area of the Lansing Capitol?
I can't even believe that we're having a conversation about why that would be necessary. I mean, we know for a fact that these individuals intended to do harm to our legislative leaders and to others who, work or who visit the Capitol. We know that they had the means to do it. We know they had the intent to do it. And yet we're still talking about whether it's a good idea to ban guns at the Capitol, as most state legislatures and most Capitol buildings do. These are just common sense measures. And it's very hard for me to understand from a law enforcement perspective why you wouldn't take this simple measure that we implement in every single courthouse in the state and in most public buildings in this state and just ban firearms to ensure that we don't see a massacre of epic proportions occur.
All right, we need to take a little quick pause for the calls. We'll hurry right back with more questions. We're coming up on an election. Would it be safe to say that you are lawyered up right now? And how prepared is your office to be able to make sure that the integrity of the voting process remains in place?
We are extremely prepared. Between myself and Secretary of State Benson, we have regular meetings on this. We are in discussions with law enforcement all over the state. And our goal is to make sure that we have envisioned every potential set of circumstances, every scenario that could possibly occur. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that every eligible voter has the opportunity to vote and that the vote is safe, secure, and accurate. And so we have gone through a litany of potential scenarios. We have dozens and dozens of attorneys in my office that have been working on this. And whether it's election day, whether it's prior to election day, or whether it's post-election day during the course of the tabulation and before certification of the election, we're going to be ready.
You're coming up on the anniversary of the clergy investigation. Any updates you can give us on this?
Yeah, so we've recently charged a few additional clergy members. So far, that's 11 total. Out of so remember, there were 7 search warrants that were simultaneously executed 2 years ago. Out of about 3.5 million electronic documents that were seized. We've gone through about 2 million of those. Out of 220 boxes of physical evidence and physical paper documents, we've gone through all but 80 boxes. We have identified at this point over 450 accused clergy members, and unfortunately over 800 victims. So the investigation's ongoing. Things would have progressed a little quicker had it not been for COVID, because of course we were unable to try more than a couple of these cases at this point because the courts have been shut down. But again, our investigation is ongoing. It is not complete. Our tip line remains open, so we continue to investigate any new tips that come in. But when all is said and done, I mean, we're talking about a lot of individuals who will have been accused and that we can bring charges against. Many of these priests, of course, are deceased. The statute of limitations has run on a lot of cases, but we're doing the best we can to identify all the cases that we possibly can to bring at least as much justice as we can that's been long overdue to so many victims.
Final question on the Flint water investigation. I know that you've been working more on the civil side of this, trying to get these settlements together. How close are you?
Well, there's at this point, there's scheduled to be a motion for a preliminary approval of the settlement before the court at the end of the month. The court still has to approve the settlement, and we're very hopeful that things will begin to move forward and that payments can be made to the plaintiffs in this case during the course of 2021. I can't give you an exact date because a lot of this, our office is removed from a certain respect because it's between the plaintiff's attorneys and the court to a large extent at this point. But our hope is that, at least from the state perspective, that city residents in Flint can expect to be indemnified next year.
Madam Attorney General, thank you so much for taking time with us today on Spotlight. Stay safe.
Same to you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today, and don't forget to watch our special Spotlight series, Inside Michigan's African American Vote, at 11 o'clock over on TV 20. My guests will include 7 community leaders from Grand Rapids to Lansing to Detroit and Ypsilanti.
We will have 50 lawyers, and we will sue your butt if, in fact, you do what is wrong and get in the way of people trying to exercise their right to vote.
I'm Chuck Stokes. Have a great week.